Hi folks, and welcome to the podcast. It's the introduction to the human brain. The human brain is the major organ of the central nervous system. And of the two systems that control the body, the central nervous system is the fastest at detecting and responding to any changes both inside and outside of the body. Understanding the parts of the human brain and its major functions is really important in understanding homeostasis and how all of the systems of the body help maintain it. So it's a great start to anatomy and physiology. You see here a picture of an actual human brain with all of its wrinkles. And the largest portion that you see on a human brain is the cerebrum, and the outer covering called the cerebral cortex. The word cortex means outer covering or bark in Latin. That sort of hamburgery looking mass at the bottom right hand side is the cerebellum, which actually means little brain. And the other portion that you can see from this outside view is the brainstem. Look a little bit more closely at them in the next few slides. The wrinkles, the actual physical wrinkles, are called gyri. A single one would be called a gyrus, and that's a Latin term for an infolding of the brain. And those wrinkles are important because they help increase the surface area of the brain and allow for many more complex connections to occur inside the cerebrum. The deep grooves are called sulci. Here's an actual functioning unit of the nervous system. It's called a neuron. And in the central portion you see that that's actually the cell body right there, sometimes called the perikaryon. These long projections are detectors. They're called dendrites, and different types of neurons have different numbers of dendrites that detect changes in the outside environment. Now when a message is sent out of a neuron, it's sent out of this outgoing projection called an axon, and that would be connected to another, the dendrite of another neuron or a muscle cell or a gland. Now you should all have in your packets a diagram of the exterior of the human brain, and I'll expect you to color in portions of it as I introduce you to the different structures of the cerebellum and the inner portions of the brain. So go ahead and get your colored pencils or crayons ready. So we turn the brain sideways and we look at an anterior view. You'll see that it has bilateral symmetry. That is, the left and right hand sides of the brain are mirror images of each other. We call these left and right hand sides hemispheres of the brain. And we turn the brain back to sideways and we're going to color in portions of the cerebrum. What's colored in blue here is called the frontal lobe. Now, of all the animals, the frontal lobe is most developed in humans, and it's where most of the higher order thinking skills come from. In yellow is the parietal lobe, green the temporal lobe, which is right around your ears, and then in the back is the occipital lobe. Down to the lower portion right here is the cerebellum, and then you can see the brain stem. On the cortex, we have two very important gyri. These two gyri are located right next to each other, but are actually parts of two different lobes of the cerebrum. The somatosensory cortex is part of the parietal lobe and is involved with organizing all of the incoming information from throughout the body, all of those senses that you can feel on your skin and even in your muscles. The motor cortex is the outgoing information. Once the brain has processed the information and decided on a reaction, it's the motor cortex that sends that information out through the spinal cord to the muscles or glands of the body. If we remove half the brain and look at the inside of one of the hemispheres, you can see a lot of the parts of the brain that you're going to actually have to know. So pause the video and take the opportunity here to color in and label these parts of the brain before you move on. And we'll discuss their function in class. Now, as we back out and look at the entire human nervous system, lots of the neurons that comprise the nervous system you just can't see from this picture, of course. We have the central nervous system, which is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. Any nerves radiating out from the spinal cord or the brain are part of the peripheral nervous system and take their messages either from the central nervous system or to it. The central nervous system is again the body's fastest method of controlling all of the body systems. So the two major divisions of the central nervous system are the central nervous system, brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system. Those are the nerves outside of the brain and the spinal cord. Let's look at the three major functions of the central nervous system. First is the sensory input. This gathers information about the outside world. It monitors changes occurring inside and outside of the body. The sensory input is performed by the peripheral nerves. Peripheral nerves will bring it to the central nervous system, that is either the brain or the spinal cord, where integration will take place. This is where the information is processed, it's interpreted, and then an action is decided upon. Then it goes back to the peripheral nervous system for motor output, a response to the integrated stimuli. So again, it starts off as sensory, integration, and then motor output. Let's take another look at this visually. The sensory is often called the afferent division. Afferent means coming into, or the input portion of a system. We have nerve fibers that carry information to the central nervous system. Here the example is photoreceptors in the eye are bringing information into the brain where it's integrated and processed in order to elicit a response. Last again is the motor, or sometimes called the efferent division of the nervous system. This includes fibers that carry impulses away from the central nervous system, again to muscles or glands of the body. Here's a diagram that simplifies it even more. We have sense organs that deliver information by the sensory or afferent nervous system, a division of the peripheral nervous system, into the central nervous system, the brain or the spinal cord. The brain of the spinal cord responds again by sending out a motor impulse, again by way of peripheral nerves. The efferent division is divided into the somatic or the voluntary reactions. These are the ones that you can control. The other is the involuntary or the autonomic nervous system. These are your reflexes, and this is your body going into autopilot, taking care of those things that you don't have to think about, such as breathing, your heart rate, the digestion and movement of smooth muscles in your stomach and intestines. Now this is divided further into a system that either speeds up those other systems, and that what we call the sympathetic. So a sympathetic stimulus from the autonomic nervous system would speed up that system. For example, make the heart go faster, allow the smooth muscles of your digestive system to work more, or cause you to breathe faster. Now, as you know, when homeostasis of these systems are restored, they have to be slowed down, and that's the job of the parasympathetic. It's an actual stimulus from the autonomic nervous system that tells the system to slow down. Now, when we do dissection, you're actually going to get a sheep brain that still has the physical covering on it from when it was dissected from the sheep itself. I want you to notice here and get used. I want you to get familiar with the structure of this covering. It actually comes in three different membrane layers. The first outer layer is called the dura mater, which actually in Latin means tough mother. It's a tough outer covering of the brain and acts to protect it. The next layer is called the arachnoid matter, and it's called the arachnoid matter for the spidery network of fibers that it uses to connect to the next layer down below. The arachnoid matter, and that space in between, is filled with what we call cerebral spinal fluid. And that cerebral spinal fluid is filled with mostly water, white blood cells, and some proteins. The blood stays in the blood vessels within the arachnoid matter. And then finally, on the surface of the brain is called the pia mater. So those are your three membranes covering the brain. Collectively, we call them the meninges. You may have heard of an infection of this membrane called spinal meningitis. Spinal meningitis can be caused by either different types of viruses or bacterium that can be quite debilitating and in some cases life-threatening. That cerebral spinal fluid, again, bathes the brain both inside and out. On the inside of the brain are these large cavities called ventricles that again help to increase the surface area of the brain and therefore allow for more complex connections of the brain. The pia mater is responsible for creating much of the spinal fluid, but so is the choroid plexus within the brain. Well, that's it for your introduction to the anatomy of the human brain. I hope this was helpful. I hope this spurred some interest as to what the functions of those different parts are, and bring any questions to class.